Vignette 5. Ambushed on the High Plain by Commander Haji Akil Shah Sahak. In May 1987, we were moving supplies from Peshawar, Pakistan, to our base west of Kabul. We followed the Logar route from Parichanar, Pakistan, across the Afghanistan border to Jaji in Paktia province. From there, we followed mountain canyons to Dobandi. Past Dobandi, the mountains ended, and we had a broad plain to cross before we reached the mountain near our base. We finally reached Dobandi and stayed there for 3 days. Map 12-3, Dobandi. We waited there while I made sure that the way was clear because the Soviets would set ambushes to interdict our supplies. I went from Dobandi to Kafar Dara Canyon for information on Soviet activity. The Mujahideen at Kafar Dara did not have any information either, so I went on to Sepets, where there were several Mujahideen bases belonging to HAR and Hazb-e-Islami. These Mujahideen gave us 2 guides, Akhuzada of HAR and Mullah Nawab. We brought up all our supplies to Sepets in the late afternoon. Including the guides, I had 31 Mujahideen with me. I planned to go forward, clear the route, establish security positions on key terrain, and likely ambush sites, and then bring the supplies forward. I moved in the middle of the column. We moved across the open plain from Sepets. There is a place called the Children's Cemetery where we stopped to offer our late afternoon prayers. Since it was still daylight, we moved well spread out with a distance between every Mujahideen. This was a precaution against air attacks. I told the guide, Mullah Nawab, to stay with us until we passed through this area and reached the Gardez Highway. We followed a stream bed through a brush-covered area. We neared the watermill midpoint between Sepets and Kato Kalay at 19:20 hours, when I looked at my watch to see if it was time for evening prayer. There was high ground on both sides of us. Suddenly, machine gun fire opened up in front of me. At first, I thought that it was my Mujahideen firing, but then I saw Soviets to the north firing at us. My Mujahideen immediately scattered and crouched behind bushes. The Soviets fired at the bushes, but my Mujahideen held their fire. The Soviets assumed that they had killed all my Mujahideen and jumped up from their positions. As I saw the Soviets jump up, I yelled, Allah Akbar, God is the greatest, and we opened fire on them. This led to a prolonged firefight. My Mujahideen were spread in a single file, and I was the 16th person in the column. Dadgul was next to me, but we did not really know exactly where the Soviets were, and they did not know exactly where we were. We fired at each other, off and on. At approximately 2200 hours, we heard the sound of armored vehicle engines moving toward us. They had come from the northwest at Pul-e-Alam. Mamur Abdul Ali began firing rockets in our support from his base in Sepets. He landed close to us, and the next went further on. The 5th rocket landed in the enemy column. This slowed down the enemy column. Akhuzada also started firing rockets at the enemy column from his base. I instructed my Mujahideen to fall back to the mountains near Abchakan and then move south of Sepets to the mountain valley where the Mujahideen bases were located. It was 0200 when we reached Akhuzada base. 16 of my Mujahideen were missing, those who were in front of me in the column. The next morning at 1000 hours, we went forward and found Mohammadeh, who was wounded, and my RPG-7 man who was killed. The rest of my Mujahideen had gone on to Logar. I do not know what the Soviet losses were, but there were reports that they had casualties. The Soviets never used that particular ambush site again. Commentary. The Soviet ambush party probably came from the 108th Motorized Rifle Division or the 103rd Airborne Division. Both were garrisoned in Kabul. The 56th Air Assault Brigade at Gardez was closer to the site, but the relief element came from the Kabul direction. The Soviet ambush site was not well laid out. There was no attempt to seal the kill zone. There were no firing lanes cleared, no aiming stakes in place, no directional mines employed, and no indirect fire planned on the kill zone. The Soviet ambush was triggered by a lone gunner and not by massed fire directed by the ambush commander. The Soviet commander evidently did not know that he had a strung-out Mujahideen column which could not mass fires to his front. Once night fell, The Mujahideen did not break contact, and the ambush commander then evidently felt that he was in contact with a large force and called for an armored column to rescue him. The Mujahideen movement plan was commendable. The commander did not hazard his supplies until he had cleared the route and posted security at key points. He coordinated with other factions to obtain information and tactical intelligence. He moved spread out on open terrain so he did not present an air target, and moved in the middle of the column where he could best exert control. He gets low marks for following the guide down to a stream bed without sending flankers to sweep the high ground. But when his force was hit, the commander was able to ascertain that his column was not in immediate danger of annihilation and shut down return fire. This allowed his men to determine where their ambushers were and to draw them out of position. The commander ordered an escape to the northeast and then a move south in the safety of the mountains rather than retracing their route and risking another ambush or drawing the relief column into the Sepets area. Chapter Commentary. Successful counter-ambush is the result of careful planning, battle drills, rehearsals, information security, patrolling, current tactical intelligence, and deception measures. Movement of supplies needs to vary by route, time, and composition of the supply column. Mujahideen supplies were moved on mule, horse, donkey, camel, truck, and human porter. While some factions had their own transport, the bulk of Mujahideen supplies were carried by contracted teamsters and muleters. The cost of transport was high, and a group with a reputation of getting ambushed would be hard put to find willing teamsters. In some areas, the Mujahideen only had to transport ammunition, but in other areas they had to transport food, clothing, and forage as well. Ammunition requirements for a small ambush by a 20-man group armed with Enfields, Kalashnikovs, an RPG-7, a PK medium machine gun, and 5 anti-tank mines might exceed 375 pounds. The weight of required ammunition shoots up dramatically as mortars, recoilless rifles, and heavy machine guns are added. Even if the ammunition was furnished free, the cost of getting it to where it was needed was considerable, and the wise Mujahideen commander carefully protected his supplies against interdiction.